and delighted to bring to you today a all-star panel who have lots and lots to say about a topic which I'm sure everyone will agree is right at the top of the agenda at the moment, particularly given the announcements yesterday, where once again we're plunged into a world of uncertainty and stress for a lot of people. There's a paper that's been put together recently that was featured in the Financial Technologist, put together by the Realization Group, featuring all of these fine people, talking about many of the issues that have affected everyone over the last couple of years. I see the title of this about a post-pandemic world. It seems like we are some way short of post still at the moment, but plenty still to be getting on with. We'll start off with some introductions, and then we're going to get into the meat of this and hopefully leave everyone here feeling all the negatives that we've been seeing and hearing over the last couple of weeks into a much more positive sort of position when we can take advantage of the situation and leave everyone in as good a position as possible. So let's do some introductions. Anna, do you want to kick us off, please?
Thanks, Toby. Yes, I'm Anna Zanghi. I'm based in Brussels, I think, unlike a lot of you. I'm the co-founder of Futur-o, which focuses on leadership, future fitness, being fit to lead organizations of the future in uncertain times is really different to what leadership has been, up to now. So that is what we aspire to do. My background is in corporate. So innovation, product development, and organization development in financial services and banking. And I'm glad to be here today.
Well, it's wonderful to have you, Anna. Thank you very much. Alicia, let's move on to you, please.
Thanks, Toby. Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Ariffin. I'm the head of people and culture at SteelEye. We're a reg tech firm based headquartered in London. And we have about 80 employees across 4 different regions in India, Portugal, and most recently in the US. My background is in financial services and HR and recruitment, and very pleased to be here as well.
Thank you very much. Chloe, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Chloe Barrett and I'm the founder of Chloe Louise Wellbeing, which is a holistic health and wellbeing solutions company. We look at taking into account all aspects of health and wellbeing and putting together an individual tailored approach in line with people's lifestyles and balance and what works for them.
Looking forward to you being the salvation for all of us later on as well. Thank you very much, Chloe. Gemma, over to you.
Hello, hi, I'm Gemma Young. I'm head of marketing over at DASL. We're a fintech tech solution for digital assets.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Dan, over your way.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Levy. I'm Vice President of Commercial and Communications at Smarkets. We're a fintech organization, very, very tech focused. We have about 140 employees across 3 offices in London, Malta, and Los Angeles. And my background's actually quite mixed. I've done a mixture of kind of business development and also journalism. I lived in France for about 9 years, working at an international news channel as the sports editor, and came back to London a few years ago and have pivoted into technology.
It's the natural progression always, isn't it? Thanks for that. And the cherry on this cake is Helen. Helen, how are you? Introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Toby. That's very gracious. I'm Helen. I'm a director and principal consultant at the Realization Group, which is a PR and marketing agency based in London, specialising in financial services and increasingly in financial technology, which is where the industry is moving. On a personal note, I've been a remote worker for many, many years, even prior to COVID, and I'm a big fan of flexible working, which doesn't mean remote working for everyone, but it means finding the flexibility to suit your way of working to make you happy in the workplace.
Fantastic. So as you can see, everyone, we've got a real spread of backgrounds, of positions and thoughts. And from that, we're hoping to bring a real pathway for everyone to sort of deal with the mental health challenges that we're all facing at the moment. Anna, I want to start with you. Through all of this and through the article that was put together for the Financial Technologist magazine, we looked at a number of different themes. And for me, it starts with leadership. I know you've got a real view that mental well-being and well-being in the workplace starts from the top. Give us a little bit of your thoughts on all of that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to create a distinction between leadership and leaders. Leadership as a whole also has an important role to play, acknowledging that we can't go back to, this, we can't hanker for the old normal because that ship has sailed, and that we don't have all the answers, but that going forward in any business, for any business to thrive and survive, where sustainability, speed, etc., are still major requirements, that integrating the employee voice is critical. So treating employees, as key stakeholders in the same way as we treat customers as key stakeholders. And that really means integrating, co-creating any new solution or any flexible work practices and a new model of how we work going forward needs to be done together with employees. I don't see how it's going to be sustainable otherwise, because the expectation gap between what employers want and what employees want is so different right now that that's going to be key. Going back to your point about the leaders, so people managers, in my opinion, are where the rubber hits the road. They interact with their teams on an ongoing basis, and they're in the best position to really tune in and see when things are just not going as they should be, when there are mental health or well-being issues. So for me, well-being needs to be a key part of their role. It needs to be integrated, not a bit like the DNA of a manager and a leader is managing employee well-being. And at the same time, you cannot expect that role to be taken on without giving them the skills and the capabilities and competencies to do so. Now, that doesn't mean, solving people's problems, but it does mean constantly tuning into how everyone is doing, not only individual employees, but the team as well. Because well-being changes in an instant. Circumstances change in an instant. So it's not something you can tune into at a performance review, every 6 months. It's an ongoing thing. So that's really important. And tuning into the whole person, it might not be something at work that is creating an issue, but it could be, the illness of a child or a partner or whatever it is. So that's really, they're in such an important position. It's not just about tuning into the employees and the team, though. It's also about tuning into themselves.
Yeah.
And, this idea of putting your oxygen mask on first, because you can't look after others if you're not in great shape. And many leaders and people managers are kind of a little bit the meat in the sandwich, because they're having to deliver, but at the same time, deliver against organizational objectives, but also work with the teams and the issues that come with operationalizing a business. So having the antenna out there is really important. And thinking very carefully about their own behavior, their own attitudes, their own work practices, and how those influence the well-being of their team members and individuals in their team. Because managers don't realize sometimes that their own practices can send very mixed messages about well-being. So on the one hand, I'm saying to you, I really am concerned about, you tuning out, deconnecting, but then I'm sending you an email at 2 a.m. or, whatever it is. This is nothing new, but it's really about walking the talk and introspecting and thinking carefully about one's own leadership styles. That I think is really critical, and creating a safe and trusting place where things that fit into mental health and well-being can be discussed. So can we discuss mental health issues? Can we discuss burnout? Can we discuss menopause and what that means for women in the workplace? Staring at a screen when you've got mental fog or whatever it is. It's some of these taboo discussions, you need to have that appreciation and empathy in how to deal with, and know also what the warning signs are and then who to reach out to.
I think this is fascinating, isn't it? Because there is the expression of heavy is the head that wears the crown, and that oxygen mask first piece there is something that's been really interesting, because this is a challenge for everyone, but there's a lot of responsibility that's going on leaders to do things which have basically had no previous experience, completely unprecedented, and no toolbox to have to deal with something there which is just a generational sort of thing to deal with. Has anyone seen anything there in leadership that absolutely stands out, that is a great lesson for people who are listening to potentially take away from all of this?
I'm happy to jump in on this one, actually.
Please do, Dan, yeah.
Anna, you kind of sparked a thought that I think has been rattling around in my head for a while, which is just this idea that, and it's something that did come up in the piece, just that kind of blurring of lines between personal and professional that I think the pandemic has really facilitated. And I think there probably was a long-term trend of that going on anyway in the workplace. But I've heard it said often in a business context that, the pandemic hasn't really changed the world, it's just moved it further forward at a quicker pace. Lots of things that were going on from a commercial perspective, from a consumer perspective, have just happened in a lot shorter time. And I think that's probably true in terms of the kind of more social aspects of work. I can speak for Smarkets. We've always been kind of quite keen to build mental health into the culture here, but it's become even more prominent, obviously, even more part of something we talk about. I think we've seen, and again, I think this is in the article, that sort of blurring of your personal life just in terms of simple logistics, like going to answer the door because there's a delivery, or your children wandering into the room, or your pet. Mm-hmm. That kind of stuff was kind of, verboten back in the day. It was seen as inappropriate. And now it's just seen as a kind of normal, holistic part of the way we live our lives and the way that we live our work lives. One thing I'd wanted to put my finger on there as well is that, speaking about leadership, I've been thinking quite a lot about vulnerability. Because I think, the pandemic's kind of thrown up this sense of sort of physical but also mental vulnerability that we all experience, and how that's not something really to be ashamed of or feel uncomfortable about. And it's actually, there's a great strength in kind of revealing your vulnerability to people. And I think that applies to leaders as well. It's a way to build trust with people. And one of the things we did at Smarkets was we got all of the members of our leadership team to write in an email to the whole company the things that they'd found helpful for their mental health. And they were allowed to talk about the stuff that they found difficult, but also, if they didn't feel comfortable doing that, just the stuff that they lean on to help them get through difficult times. And we saw that as a way of kind of, partly humanizing the bosses, but also, just accepting, being the kind of like the instigator of that vulnerability, so that other people feel they can do it too. And I think that's something that's been in my mind a lot for the last kind of year and a half.
Love that. Gemma, you're waving your hand as well, keen to weigh in.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with some of the bits that Dan said there, actually. And from a personal perspective, having 4 children myself, it always felt pre-pandemic that you almost had to pretend that you didn't have kids in order to look equal in the office space, whereas what it's done is opened up the normality of having children and having different distractions at home, not just kids. Like I've had the cat and the dog come in on the screen previously, not just the 3-year-old, and whereas before, that was something that you really had to hide and hope didn't happen and really stress about. Now there is an acceptance, as Dan was saying, that these things do exist, and it doesn't make you any lesser of an employee, but actually, to actually accept that we've all got these different things going on in our lives is really respectful and lets us be ourselves at work, and it's been really positive.
It does seem funny, doesn't it, about that BBC interview with the kids running in halfway through it. Yeah. Now seems absolutely ridiculous that we're all laughing about that all that time away. There's been a change as we're talking about beforehand, and I want to talk about SteelEye, Alicia, as well, because that's a business I've known for some time, and it's a business that's had people and connectivity and co-creation and being in a culture as very much as a startup. It was very much the core of everything, the glue of it all. And then we've suddenly found a situation 18 months, 2 years ago where that became very different overnight. And I think you guys did a lot of work to not only look at the individuals there, but also in a period of rapid growth with new people coming into it, to keep that culture, keep that creativity. And I think you've managed to take a negative of this and actually turn it into a working environment. I think we might even better. It was a great working environment to start with, but a great thing, even better for longer. Tell us a little bit about how you've managed that and some of the lessons we can take from SteelEye and how you guys have navigated this whole thing.
Thanks, Toby. Over the pandemic, when we had to, just to give some context, when we all had to start working remotely, one thing I did find that was extremely important and still try and drive internally is communication, clear communication to all the business, to all your employees, and transparency, I think, was very key. And actually over communication was really important when we were all in this new world of working remotely, and there was lots of unknowns. As we've come back into the office, we've adopted a hybrid work model. So there are remote first days. So Wednesday and Fridays are our remote first days, where people can choose to work from home if they want to. And the other days are in the office. And I think what that's helped to do is provide people with the place in which we can meet to continue to collaborate. we enjoy being with one another. We like to bounce ideas off one another in person, and I think it helps to build on building relationships, inter-team relationships, and getting to know one another. But what it also allows people to do is to address stuff that happens and that they want to at home. I have 2 young children that go to primary school. I like to do drop-offs and pickups as much as I can, and be there for them, and do the bits around the house that I don't necessarily get to do if I was working from the office 5 days a week, 9 to 5. So what we do, as everyone has said so far, is address the fact that people have lives, have other priorities, but also work is a big part of our life, and we want to ensure that we can do best in both, and it is a case of having sort of best of both worlds. And yes, we do like to socialize. We had a great Christmas party recently. Thankfully, we were allowed to do that. And I think it just helps. Yeah, it just did. Snuck that in. I think it matters, and for a lot of people, as Helen, you mentioned, being remote all the time is not for everybody, and that has been addressed, and that is something that we continue to look at. Is everybody's different. Some people thrive being at home all the time. I don't. I was very open about that, and I struggled working from home with my children around and feeling like I didn't have any boundaries. So I think you do, as a company and as leaders, and also as we navigate through this, you say we're not past it yet. We're still going through lots of changes and unknowns. I think we just have to keep tapping into what the employees are saying, how they're feeling, and keeping that communication open and keeping that flexibility there as well.
Absolutely. And Helen, I know this is something you're very passionate about, as you said at the sort of top of the show, that you've been in this sort of scenario for some time, but I think there's also that sort of appreciation of there is still the ability to sort of keep that engagement. I think a lot of people are concerned about during this sort of time. They worry as business leaders that not having people connected together can lead to a lack of engagement that will lead to potentially concerns about retention of staff and such like, when actually it can have the completely reverse effect. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting how circumstances change, because I was self-employed for many years and I did work remotely, but for me that was quite peaceful because everybody else in my house was out. They were at school or they were at the workplace. So I had, the house to myself essentially, and I'm lucky enough to have an office at the end of my garden, which I'm sitting in now. So this was my dedicated space, and a lot of people didn't have that when the pandemic struck. They were stuck in a corner, some bedroom, some kitchen, some, cloakroom or something, trying to find a tiny space where they could work with all of the family around and everyone homeschooling. And I stopped enjoying working remotely when everyone else came into the home again, because then I didn't have my boundaries, I didn't have my peace and quiet. And the reason I liked working remotely was when I was writing something or doing a proposal or some thinking work, I had complete sort of peace and quiet to do that without any distraction. But I would get my social interaction from going to a lot of conferences, having meeting days where I went into town and had meetings with people. So working remotely is a skill that I think built over many, many years, and there are tricks to it. There are kind of ways to motivate yourself, ways to organize yourself that make working from home productive and enjoyable, but you don't learn to do it overnight. And with the pandemic, a lot of people suddenly got thrown into that. So I think now we're in this hybrid world where we're, trying, failing to sort of get back to offices to some extent, and people are adapting to whichever way they found best. So suddenly people had a lot of realizations during the pandemic that actually I work best at home, or I work best in the office, or I work best in a combination of the two. And it is about flexibility and choice, I think. The Realisation Group, I've been working there for about a year now, and they've always had a policy of being very flexible about how people work, and I think that is the key, because it very much depends on your circumstances, partly your age. Maybe if you're younger, you live alone and you really like to come into the office for the social side, and also to learn from other colleagues who are more experienced, because that's, learning by osmosis is the way I certainly learned it in the earlier part of my career, by being around other people who knew their job, and I could sort of shadow what they did. And you can't do that when you're sitting at home at a desk on your own. You just don't get that opportunity. But equally, in other stages of life, you may have young children, you may want to be on the school run, or you may have caring responsibilities, and actually working from home makes you happy because it means you can fit all those things in. And there'll always be crunches, and there'll always be times when you can't really do both as well as you want to, but it gives you much more freedom to try and kind of keep everything going on the home front and on the professional side. So I think the flexibility and choice is what makes employees happy ultimately. So I think it's the right thing for employers to do, just from a kind of, a sort of ethical standpoint, but also from a retention point of view. If people are happy and their personal lives are acknowledged at work, and we can be more honest now, I think, about those things because of the pandemic. Everyone's been checking up on everyone to see if their mental health is okay, because we know that the whole world has gone sort of chaotic outside the walls of our homes. That's what keeps people in a company, because they think, well, these people care about me and I enjoy working here, therefore I want to stay there. So I think there's a kind of commercial goal as well as just a moral imperative to think about how we can do it in the best way. It also depends on size of organisation. I think sometimes, this is easier maybe for startups or small organisations where they've got more of a sort of family sphere and a small number of staff, and you can have discussions about what everybody wants and how everybody feels. Larger organisations, on the other hand, have a lot more resources. They can bring in facilities to have, activities in the workplace that can help people, whether it's yoga classes or whether it's, sessions about good mental health, or whether it's other activities for wellness, or sending people things to their home. Sometimes if you can't have a Christmas party, you can send a gift, you can make people feel special and valued. So it is difficult. Maybe people here who are from different size organizations have a view on that. I know Chloe hasn't had a chance to speak in detail yet, so maybe Chloe, you can talk a bit about that, because I know that your focus on wellness is the main part of what you do.
Sometimes, especially in the workplace, you don't treat your colleagues how you might, you might not treat your colleagues how you would treat a friend or a family member, because they're simply someone you work with. Whereas it's about kind of rehumanizing the workplace and how we're treating each other. So I think for me, it's, if people feel like they need to develop those skills of being able to be more empathetic and compassionate, I think for me that there's a step you could look at it as, I know the terms sympathy, empathy and compassion can sometimes be used alongside each other, but for me it's kind of, I like to think of it as a progression. So if you think of sympathy is to me is an understanding. It's saying, I feel sorry for you, I understand you're going through that, and I'm sorry for that. But a lot of people actually, I don't think, want sympathy. They don't want to feel pitied. What we often want when we're going through something is a moment of meaningful connection. And I think when you don't have that feeling, that empathy there, you can struggle to create that authentic, meaningful connection. And I think something, people aren't silly, they can feel that. And some people, if you're an empath, you're going to literally, it means to feel what someone is feeling. And you don't have to go that far, but it's kind of that practice of taking a step back and saying, okay, what might this person be feeling in this situation? And obviously you're not going to hit the nail on the head. You can't really truly feel, or know what someone's experiencing, but it's that practice of taking that step and taking the practice of saying, okay, if this was me, what might I be feeling? But what's really, really important, and I can't stress this enough, is that expression, put yourself in someone else's shoes. I like to say, take your own shoes off first. Don't bring all your stuff to their situation, because what they're going through is going to be completely different to what you're going through. So that expression, put yourself in someone else's shoes, to me is an activity. It's for a purpose, to get you to feel something so that you can bring a moment of connection to that other person. And kind of that then leads into compassion. So that's our third step, which is action. And I think a lot of people think of compassion as being similar to sympathy and feeling sorry for someone. And actually, if you kind of go down the Buddhist teachings, it's very much, it's an action. It's wanting to help someone and resolve their suffering. And again, it's really important for this is not to, it's to open up a dialogue. It's not to say, oh, I know what's best for you, I'm going to solve your problem. We would like to feel like we're going to help someone and we want to solve their problem. And so we're going to say, oh, let's do this, this, and this. It might be, oh, let me take some of your workload off, or whatever it might be. But actually, you need to find out what that person actually wants and what they need. And this goes for going forward, but also in that moment, when someone's in that moment of suffering, what do they need from you? And I think it's actually and this applies to any relationship, ask the question, what do you need from me right now? And I like to do this with my friends, my family, when they're venting to me, I go, what do you need? Do you just want to vent? Do you want some advice? What do you need? And then allow them to tell you. And similarly, don't be afraid when you're talking to someone to say to someone, this is what I need from you right now. And especially in a managerial relationship, being really clear, okay, I'm struggling, this is what I need. And opening that dialogue of communication, but also keeping it open, because as you said earlier, needs change over time, and what you're feeling is going to change over time. So that would be my kind of take on that, and bringing a more meaningful moment of connection. But also, if you want to create a culture of health and a culture of support and communication, doing that through these little moments can really help to implement within an organization a culture where you are taking care of each other and where people do feel connected. And we all crave, is one of the biggest human needs, is to feel connected and feel belonging. So if you can implement those moments within an organization or whatever it is you're doing, you can kind of start to embed that into the culture of the organization.
I think that's a massive part there, isn't it? Where you talk about the individuals and how everyone is dealing with different things at different stages. Dan, I know this has been something you've been passionate about, isn't it? There's been a lot there where we are dealing with, one day we'll be fine, the next day something will happen. There's a lot of changing nature of everyone's individual circumstances and different things happening to loved ones at different stages. You've got some thoughts on this as well, haven't you? Tell us a little bit about your thoughts here.
On the sort of dynamic nature,
the whole concept of understanding the individual and taking time to work with that individual, as opposed to have a blanket one-size-fits-all strategy to wellness.
Yeah, I mean, at Smarkets, one of the things we've been keen on from the very start is, it's actually something that I think you've come to hear more and more broadly in the business world. But we talk a lot about being your authentic self. And I feel like authenticity is something that's really kind of increasingly, and it sort of speaks to what I was mentioning earlier about how we sort of integrated our personal lives a bit more into our working lives, and what Gemma was saying about, the fact that we don't feel we are going to be penalized for being a person who has a life and a family and pets outside of the work environment. And I think increasingly, people are feeling more comfortable doing that. And it's something that we've tried to instill from the very start. And it's kind of one of the things that spoke to me when I moved back to London and found Smarkets as a company. I sort of, as soon as I walked through the door, I had a feeling that I could be myself. And I used to be a TV presenter, so I was very used to being somewhere where I would quite literally go on television and kind of play a character and be a version of myself that was very composed and, sort of obviously trying to act like everything's fine whilst you see, the camera's on fire in the background and people are running around and you forgot your script.
Or your Wi-Fi drops out halfway through a live webinar, exactly. That sort of thing.
Exactly. You can imagine that happening. And it's really funny, actually. Just to go on a very slight tangent, you mentioned that guy, it was the BBC reporter, I think, is the chap who was sitting at the desk.
Yeah.
It's kind of come bounding in.
Yeah.
And even at the time, that was probably, 8-9 years ago? I was working in TV at the time, and it always really irritated me because he looked so uncomfortable with it. And even at the time, I thought, no one's going to mind if you have it's very cute. It's just this very sweet thing. If he just said, oh, hello, darling, kind of put her on his knee or whatever, or just said, sorry, daddy's working, I think it would have been fine. What made it sort of go viral, I think, was how uncomfortable he looked. And then how sort of desperate his reaction was.
It was so unusual at that sort of stage, wasn't it? It was so.
It was partly that. It was partly that, but it always struck me as very unnecessary that he looks so uncomfortable with it. And then I think there's a lady who comes in and she's kind of scrambling around on her knees. It was all kind of awful, and actually it never needed to be like that. Anyway, that's a small pet peeve of mine that always bothered me. But now that kind of thing would be, it happened so many times during the pandemic that we saw people's kids or pets or whatever run in, and everybody loves it because it says, look, they're just like me, they're just like everyone else. Yeah. And I think that is a part of the fact that we are increasingly able to be ourselves at work. And at Smarkets, one of the things we do is we have a weekly session called Tête-à-Tête, where a different topic is picked each week and people can come along and just kind of discuss anything. And this happens during work hours. And sometimes it's very acutely around a particular mental health issue. Sometimes it's just an open session and people can say whatever they like. Sometimes you decide to talk about cinema or something. But it really is a kind of open session where people can just say anything. And it gets quite deep. Like, you know, I'd done therapy in my life in the past, so I was kind of used to going into sessions and talking about myself. But my first week here, this is 4 years ago, you know, it was in my calendar. I went on to this meeting, and the first thing I hear is this guy saying, you know, I'm really angry with my brother's coming over, and he's always sort of taken the shine off me with my parents' eyes, and I've got this sort of resentment towards him. And I was like, you know, what is this meeting? And it wasn't particularly alien to me because, you know, as I said, I'd done a lot of talk therapy, but to see that in a work environment was completely new, and to me, very refreshing. And I think I personally really like being in a work environment, and I think most people do. They just didn't feel they could ask for it. But I really like being in a work environment where that kind of thing is kind of normal, and that you can talk about the stuff that we feel like we shouldn't talk about and show at work.
You talked there about refreshing, and I think that is one of the, you know, the positives to come out of the negative of the pandemic, is that there's a lot more things have been normalized and create a better scenario. Anna, I can see you waving your hand there as well.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. You know, this idea of bring your whole self to work. You know, I remember in my early career, a boss of mine saying to me, when you cross this bridge and get towards the office building, you leave your personal self behind. And I kept trying to figure out how that could be possible, you know. That is such a, you really, the benefit of having a diverse team is that they all bring all different facets of themselves to work, right? And that's where the creative energy comes, and where we can really create our best work. But there was also something else that I wanted to mention, that a saying from someone who's inspired me tremendously in my career, a role model who was Ajay Banga at MasterCard, ex-CEO and chairman. And you know, he spoke a lot about IQ and EQ. You know, EQ is kind of, you need to be competent to do the job. You need to have the emotional intelligence. But he added the DQ, the Decency Quotient, which, you know, for me was just, that was really what I was missing, is that sometimes, people are tuned in to the, have the emotional intelligence, but choose not to act or do the right thing. And I think that has always been so inspiring for me. And when I think about being fit to lead for the future, that is really important, wanting something positive for everyone in the workplace, and ensuring that they are cared for, respected, and valued, and doing the right thing. So that was something very profound for me that I think summarizes a lot of this, right? The authenticity, the bringing your whole self to work, tuning into others, and doing the right thing, actually caring at a human level.
Gemma, I can see you nodding there as well.
Yeah, I was going to actually just talk about another area of diversity that's not been touched on, that the pandemic has really brought into play as well, is accessibility. There's lots of people that wouldn't necessarily go to a panel like this if it was in person, whether that be because socially they didn't want to, whether because of their home life, like evening events with children and that kind of thing, or caring for other parents and so on. And also from a neurodiverse point of view, if they didn't want to be involved, they wanted to hear the panel but didn't want to get involved, physical sides with hearing difficulties. All of this is now so much more accessible online through webinars like today. And it was something that I was fighting for pre-pandemic, but it was kind of like, yeah, but how much is that needed? And actually what's been beautiful is it's seen that it is needed by a lot of people, but they didn't want to put their hand up and be the one to say, actually, I need it. And we've seen this massive level of accessibility grow within the pandemic that hopefully stays.
I just wanted to add to what everybody was saying, but with Dan and Anna in particular, I think building a workplace, or having a workplace where culturally it is more than acceptable. It's encouraged to just really talk about your feelings. If you're struggling with your mental health, if you are suffering from stress or anxiety or whatever it is, that you feel that you can talk to not just me in HR or your head of people, but to anybody within that organization, to your line manager, to your CEO. I think having building on that sort of basis where you feel that you can, like you say, be a person with a life outside of work. I think that's what the pandemic has really taught us, and really we should continue to embrace that and understand that, to be really motivated, to retain people, to feel valued, that you want to work somewhere that reflects that. And we try and encourage it as much as we can at SteelEye. And sometimes it is tough, and you have difficult conversations with people. Like you say, their health and well-being can go up and down at any time. So yes, you do also have to look after yourself. Not just speaking from personal experience, but with your leaders, within the company, you have to teach them, or as Anna said, that it starts with yourself. Put that oxygen mask on first, and I think people will respect that and respect the company a lot more when they're leaders, if they can see that they're not robots and they're not superheroes either. We're all just human beings at the end of the day.
It goes back to that whole piece, doesn't it, about this being completely unique as a situation, and everyone learning as they're as they're going through, which is creating. I love the expression of necessity being the mother of all invention, and we've seen some companies there do spectacular things over that sort of period. Gemma, I know with DASL in particular, there's been a completely new way of thinking as a sort of creative, innovative business. It's sort of played to the strengths of the company to some extent, hasn't it? Tell us a little bit about your experiences there.
Yeah, so what we did at DASL is we used the innovation and the mindset that we had towards creating the technical solutions for fintech to actually, overcome the issues that we all had at the time with the pandemic and working from home. And, it was kind of thinking outside the box of what we all saw as the normal. To go to work, you had to go to an office. You all had to go to that office from 9 till 5 and be there at the same time, and figure out what we needed as a company and how we could find a solution for that. So as a company, we wanted to still come together once a week so that we could bounce ideas off each other. Obviously, there were lots of restrictions in place, so we needed somewhere that was predominantly outside, and which goes against a tech company, right? But in the end, what Richard, our founder, came up with was to give us all a membership at a country club called the Birch, which saw us working in teepees, which sounds amazing, and it was amazing. But what it gave us is all an idea of, actually, you don't have to be in an office to come up with creative solutions. And actually, when you were all stuck at home, with this different life of homeschooling and, stuck with cabin fever of working from a computer all day and only seeing each other in these boxes like we are now, we could come together, and we were literally in this teepee with sheep walking around us in the field. But what that country club gave us as well was, you then had access to all the other facilities there. You could go swimming before work, swimming after work, during your lunch even. They had yoga sessions outside on the field, and it was all then obviously within the restrictions of COVID. But it meant that you were giving the staff a little bit more than just a place to work, and a little bit more than just a way of bouncing ideas off each other. And it's interesting to see how the communities there have actually grown. There's so many companies there now from so many different diverse backgrounds that are using that same workspace. Not in the teepee at the moment, a bit too chilly, but they have different rooms for different things, and there they have music rooms and deck chair rooms. And even at this place, it's not your traditional country retreats where you think of an office space of needing this, desk and grey room. It's very bright and colourful, and it just plays into how you can create a different workplace. Doesn't need to be negative, it can be positive, and we've seen that. Yeah,
definitely. Just one bit of golden advice from everyone, for either a company who are looking to help their teams through difficult times, or for an individual about what they can do to be better and to look after themselves over this period as well. Helen, I'm going to throw that to you first and foremost. A quick pearl of wisdom that we can put out to everyone before we move into the questions.
I think the thing that I learned a few years back when I was running a very busy business and I had a young child was, don't wait for the battery to get down to zero, because I think what tends to happen is people get completely drained and then they say, oh, I should do something, I should get a massage, I should go to yoga, or I should do whatever it is that makes me feel better. But it's almost too late when the battery's down to zero. You're so kind of burnt out and drained, you can't even enjoy the thing that you decide to do to make yourself feel better. So notice when the battery's getting down to sort of like 45%, 50%, and do something then, rather than wait for it to get all the way down to the bottom.
Absolutely agree with that. Chloe, let's roll up to you next, please.
Actually, it rolls on perfectly from what Helen just said, is that I think for me, one of the biggest concerns is sedentary behavior. I think is even worse being at home than it is in the office. And I know some people are just sat on Zoom call after Zoom call, and actually taking breaks is really important before you get to that point that your back's hurting and your eyes are fatiguing and you can't think anymore, because by the time your back's hurting, it's too late. So, I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love for people to stand up every half an hour. That, for me anyway, especially coming from a history of chronic pain, standing up every half an hour helps massively. But I think the biggest takeaway perhaps could be maybe use the end of your Zoom calls as a prompt to remind you to do one of three things, or all of them if you could, and that would be to relax. Because when you're sat at your desk, you know, your shoulders creep up. So just take a deep breath, say relax, allow your body to relax, let your shoulders, so everyone drop their shoulders, and then kind of let that go through your body. So release your back, your glutes, your legs, your calves. You don't realize where tension's building up. So that would be relax, move. So get up, do some laps around your house, around your flat. If you can do a cool, you know, without the Zoom, then that's great. Walk around. And then the last one is stretch. And this is actually, people can do this a lot more intuitively. You don't need set stretches, just your body will tell you how it wants to move. And if just at the end of each Zoom call, you can do some of that. I don't know if we have time, I could show you one you could do in your chair for your neck. I don't know if we have time for that.
We are running. I tell you what, if we're at the end and we've answered the questions, we'll run straight back into it. But I'm looking forward to that, because I need to do some stretching as well.
Well, it just helps release those stress headaches and the migraines you get from sitting with your shoulders like this, and it goes up into the back of your head. So doing some neck stretches will help release that.
I'm all over that. That's definitely coming out in the outtakes for sure. Alicia, let's roll over to you.
I'd say, you know, putting your employee at the heart of your business is obviously very, very key, and taking into consideration their views. What we did very recently in the last couple of months was we implemented a wellness day for everybody. So it wasn't on the same day at the same time. It was one of 2 Fridays. Please just take the day off to do whatever you want, whether it's to have a massage, go for a walk, go shopping. It's a small thank yous, I think, go a long way. So, you know, take time to say thank you to your team. And along with what Chloe said, you know, make sure, and Helen, just build in, you know, encourage people to just step away from the laptops and really spot the signs to prevent burnout. That was really key for me and for us this year, was to ensure that people understood what burnout was. We had somebody external come in and talk to the team and say, this is what it is. If you think you're on that path, you know, please address it, and we'll help you to address that now, because the last thing you want is a company full of very stressed, very burnt out people who may then be on long-term sick leave. So yeah, look after your people. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Dan, we'll move on to you.
Yeah, I think this sort of slightly builds on what Alicia was just saying, and is kind of congruent with what I've been saying before. But I suppose my advice to people who are in an organization and perhaps in a leadership role would be to try and instill a culture where people can be themselves. And the way you do that, I think, is by leading by example. And that means, to a certain degree, you know, embodying vulnerability yourself, or being clear and authentic about who you are and what's important to you, and communicating to others that it's okay for them to do the same. I just think that's a great way to get, you know, as much of a cliche as it might sound, the kind of warm and fuzzy feeling that you want in a workplace, that I think helps, you know, significantly with retention, and also with drawing in people to a kind of environment where, you know, they feel that they're going to be able to actually be who they really want to be. And that's usually a way, I think, to kind of over-index and overperform on recruiting top talent, is to say to people, look, you can work somewhere where you can actually really be yourself, and you don't have to do what Anna was told to do back in the day, which was, you know, to kind of leave yourself outside at the door. I don't think anyone really wants to do that. I think we've all sort of accepted gradually over the years that we had to, or those of us at least who are a bit older, And now I'd like to think that's sort of slowly dissipating, and I think a way to accelerate that is to set the example from the top.
That's great. Anna, is your bit of advice to leave yourself at the door, or is it something different?
No, it's different, but I'll be brief. It's leadership. It's invest in employee experience in the same way as you invest in your customer experience, and you will succeed in both.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And Gemma, let's round off with you before we move into the questions.
Okay, so I agree with what everyone's saying. Actually, it's hard to go last because they've put up great points. But I would say, continue to disrupt and question your business model from a culture and people point of view. Innovation was very much a matter of survival at the beginning of COVID, but we've seen lots of positivities today, and I'm sure there's many more out there. So if we keep on questioning it, what can we come up with for the future?
Definitely. There's been wonderful innovation in the workplace, I think, through this, and hopefully it becomes a lasting legacy for a better workplace moving further forward.